Hello, I recently came here and I recorded a video in this very place about my recent layoff from the tech industry, and that video got a lot of positive feedback, a lot of interest. People are very interested in that topic, and I thought I will follow up and make one about what it's like to work in the tech industry. In particular, I worked for Amazon and some other companies, so I want to focus on that experience in big tech. I'll talk about how you can get in, what it takes to get into these companies, what it's like once you get there, and I'll compare them to some other companies that I've worked for. So first thing, how do you get in? Well, it takes probably two ways in my experience, in my observations. One, many of the people who I worked with had gone to reputable schools. They had gotten computer science degrees, and they even had master's degrees often. I noticed, especially later on, most of the new hires who were straight from school were actually with masters. Even a bachelor wasn't quite enough. Though there's a significant hiring from other countries, and I don't know exactly what universities they come from, but I noticed some from China and Mexico would come from certain schools in those countries that are very strong and reputable. And so it probably is valid about those countries as well. That's how Amazon is sourcing. And if you don't have that kind of degree to get in through school, through credentials from academia, it's difficult, actually, very difficult to get on their radar. They reject thousands and thousands of people. One way to probably get a shortcut is still internships, and you can go and apply to get into Amazon as an intern, and that program is very good. I had interns a few times in Amazon, and it was really nice because these were sharp people who came, and they are given a project and they are told, here's a project. You would actually almost simulate a real world project in Amazon. In some cases, it actually would be launched on Amazon. Though in my experience, no intern actually managed to make a project which was production ready, and it take a seasoned developer to pick it up after and launch it. So in a way, they create proof of concept, but they create them within existing Amazon systems. And for every internship, there's a path to get a job offer. And it takes your mentor, it takes one more person and the manager to vouch for you that you did a good job and you actually can receive an offer. Now, that's one way, through school. Another way is if you are experienced, and that is what I did. I did not go to the acclaimed school here in the USA. I went to a normal school, you could say. And I do have a degree in coding. And in high school, I did study computer science. Where I'm from, we have majors in high school, and I applied for a STEM school. So we also have that. We have STEM high schools. I applied there, and I entered in the computer science class. So since 8th grade, I did extensive computer science learning. And then I came to America. I did some more coding in college. And then I worked for a good number of years. First I worked for a small company, then I worked for the government of Seattle, then I worked for a few private companies, and then I moved over to Amazon. But the truth is, Amazon still probably wouldn't have hired me based on that kind of resume unless I did what I did, and that was to train myself in a technology which was very new back then. It was really the surge of JavaScript usage. I was one of the big proponents of that. I had a blog, I had open source projects, I was speaking at meetups, etc. I was coding in frameworks which the experienced developers didn't know, and they actually shunned them. They said they're not tested for production, they cannot be launched, they're not compliant with the frameworks which exist in these companies, etc., etc. So I was one of the people who were out there advocating the opposing point of view, that these new technologies are better than what these giant companies are using, and we should be using them to make a better internet, better web applications, etc. Based on that experience, I was hired by top companies to prove that concept. And once I did enter, I did prove it. And I was able to launch React and Node applications as early as 2014-15, when these technologies were very new. And so that was my path. I had to, first of all, I coded since I was 8 years old. That's when I coded my first application. I used the DIY coding magazine. I typed up code for a horse racing game in Visual Basic on the 8-bit computer, which the communists made. It was a ripoff from an Apple, I believe. And I started learning coding since then. And so I had coded basically all my life that I could remember. I had gone to school for STEM, for coding, in particular computer science. I came to America, got a degree in a college that I could afford, and then I worked something like 10 years in the industry. Then I trained myself in a technology which was very new, and colleges did not teach, and big companies did not yet embrace. And that worked for me. So if you can do something like that, even if you don't come from the top school with the top education and a master's degree, you can probably still get in. Now, the truth is, getting in is the hardest part, because after you get in, you actually get a ton of interest after you have proven, but at first it's really hard. So when you're young and when you're new and you don't necessarily have the confidence and the connections, that's the hardest time to get a job. So it only gets easier, so don't lose hope. And then comes the interview itself. The interviews are very, very hard indeed. And all coding interviews are hard because you're put on the spot and it's all time bound. And really, you have this problem to solve and you have one chance because you're given 30 minutes to write an algorithm on a whiteboard. Later we started using live coding, and so at least you knew if your code would compile and what result you would produce. But what was the case at first was you're coding on the whiteboard, you're given problems, you have to solve them fast. If you go into a bad direction, there really is very little chance to recover. So you have to really be on top of it, like it's hard. And in the case of Amazon, the interview, it always starts with like a phone screen. A manager kind of gets a feeling, and then an engineer starts over the phone already ask you technical questions, the next phase. So you have to do a preliminary screen with an engineer who basically his job is to weed out the candidates so that the company doesn't waste its time for a full loop, what they call. And those loops are expensive because all their employees have to take an hour off. And so you're talking about 5-6 employees who take an hour off their daily job. They're highly paid. Therefore, every interview loop is very expensive. And so if you pass the phone screen, you'll be offered the full loop. And that's really the hardest part of all, obviously. In my case, the loop was for a senior position, and I had to talk to some of the top engineers in the field that they had in my area of specialization and code live, basically. And then I had to also talk to some general manager, director level people and convince them that indeed I was a good hire. It wasn't at all easy, like it's comparable to the hardest exams I've ever taken, if not harder. It lasted something like 5 to 6 hours, and it was really hard and exhausting, but I obviously did it. I was hired, and also I should mention I had to get a referral. I did not actually plan at all to work for Amazon. It was that a coworker who I had worked with liked my performance at my previous employer and referred me to Amazon. So that's how I got in on their radar. It's not like they found my resume or anything, or I applied. I was referred internally by an existing manager who I had worked with, and then I was contacted by a manager, and then I proceeded. So then I did the loop. There were people level 6, 7, and 8 interviewing me, and I'll explain more to you about these levels. 8 is director. So I talked to a director. She asked me, can you solve a problem, a real problem I'm having in my organization? And I explained how I would solve it, and she said, yeah, that actually is better than what my people are telling me. So she gave me a good mark on my interview. And then I was able to get in. That's what it took in my case. So you hear, my whole life I've been coding. I had to continue training through my career. I did have to go to college to get a degree, and I also got a referral. And then I had to pass that giant 5-6 hours interview loop with very senior people. And so because of all that, I got in. Now, once you get in, things very much depend on the level you are hired. So the Amazon levels, they work like this. If you're 1 to 3, you're working somewhere ground level operations or the warehouses, etc. If you're working in the corporate layer, you start at level 4 and up. And at level 12, I believe, is the CEO. So everyone else falls somewhere in between. When you are a brand new worker coming from college or not that experienced, you're placed at level 4, which is basically a junior, you could say, or just a starting level developer. And at that level, you are expected to be a learner. You should be putting out code in production, but not independently. You should be very receptive to being coached and how more experienced people are able to work with you. If you are taking their direction, if you are beginning to be on par, you will then proceed. And these level 4 people are actually not that well paid, contrary to what you may have heard about big tech. They get the lowest offers, and that's a bad thing, because I'll explain to you the pay structure across these levels as well. So if you enter as a level 4, you enter at a rather low pay, and you are considered a junior. You're not really independently doing much. And the promise or the hope for your manager is that you quickly grow in your career to be able to work independently and put out production code, and which is normally a level 5 type of person. That is the intermediary position for a manager, or anybody really, manager or engineer. But let's focus on software engineers. You get to level 5, and that is truly the workhorse of the company. Basically, I've heard the phrase, Amazon works on level 5 people. That's who runs it truly, because they do the bulk of the actual work. And the reason is that at that level, you are expected to independently be very productive without having to be coached all that much, without having to have other people come and save you if there's a problem. Your efficiency is supposed to be very, very good, and you should be able to put out production quality code at a large scale. And I'll talk about scale as well, because that is the hardest thing about working at a company like Amazon or Google or Facebook, etc. It's easy to create a web application or a service, but when you scale it to billions of requests, that's when things start getting crazy. But anyway, back to the leveling. You are then able to, at level 5, to do most of the work on your own. And here is the hard part. At least when I was there, or even a bit before that, the promotion between level 5 intermediary and level 6 senior was very, very difficult. I had heard the number that only 2% of the level 5s get to level 6, and that is really brutal. So it's like that's really the hardest hurdle of them all. And I think they started loosening that because too much turnover, people would give up and quit. And so the thing is that if you don't get promoted at level 5, you actually never get to the really good pay that you keep hearing about. It really, the good part of working at a company like Amazon starts at level 6. When you're a senior, you get the good money and you get the influence to be doing things that you may find interesting. Like you are able to set the standards, and you're able to write the architecture, and you're able to meet people who are in general management or director or VP level and advise them on the direction the team or the organization even should take. And so at level 5, you're expected to work the hardest, really, because you're almost 100% coding. And then you actually don't have the best pay and don't have the most influence. You're still bound by what the higher-ups have done before you. and you are working the most, pretty much. The other factor is that at level 5, you're also supposed to be very good at holding the front if there's a real time problem. So one of the hardest, I would say the worst thing about working at Amazon and such companies is that these productions are up 24/7 and they get huge usage, and therefore even if for an hour in the middle of the night there is a problem with the application, you start accruing massive losses. And so there's always an on-call person with a pager, and if there's a problem, you have to wake up and immediately work on fixing it. Now that may mean you just went to bed an hour ago and you have not had any sleep, you worked all day, and then you get a page and you get up and you cringe and you grind your teeth, and you have to get your brain in a good enough shape that you pick up existing production application, which is actually hard to analyze and debug and fix in real time. So you have to do all that with no sleep and overworked, overtired in the middle of the night. And then after that, you have to write a report, data analysis. You say how many requests failed because of an error or something like that, or an attack or a hack or whatever. And you have to calculate all that. You have to then estimate how much money that cost. And if the money that it cost is over a certain threshold established by your particular organization, you also have to write a giant paper called correction of error, and COE, yeah, that's right. And so in there, you have to analyze why did the problem occur, and how quickly you responded, and how many the losses were, and what is now to be done that this never happens again. And this happens every time there's a so-called major incident. Now, some incidents are so major that even the senior VPs that report directly to the CEO start getting on a call. So the worst case scenario is really a very major accident happens, you're on call, and these very high up people start joining the call, basically to put on pressure on everyone to fix it. And it's like a major fire going through the company, and there's chatter. All this is meticulously having to be documented in their systems in the back, where they now have to have a paper trail about what happened and how quickly it was mitigated or resolved, and who was online at that time to fix it, who's his manager, their director, their VP, and it all really trickles up to the top eventually. So some incidents are so major, they go to the CEO, and major things have to happen to fix things. So, you know, this is a very strict way of doing things. Everything is taken extremely seriously. And at level 5, like I said, you have to be able to work on that level and to be on call to handle such problems. Now, the other crazy part is that some parts of the companies, they have such alarms go off. And that's the other thing. Everything you do in these big companies has an alarm associated with it. If you know software development and software applications, you know that when you're making services and front ends, there are requests between the server and the front end. So a request goes out, that request may succeed or fail. The response may or may not be what is expected. And if that starts failing at a certain rate, you have to fire an alarm to wake up somebody at night. That's really how it works. And so that means every little thing a user can do, whether it's on the front end or the back end, is then tracked. And if it starts failing, then you have to have an alarm fire, and someone has to wake up and troubleshoot that. And so they start, but the hard part is not just that, but there's just about infinite, numerous, I should say, amount of interconnected systems. So you don't know whether the problem originates on your layer or upstream. And so if you wake up, you get an error, but you have dependent services and applications somewhere upstream, you then have to analyze that and submit enough data to the next person who you have to wake up with a page. And so it keeps going up until a so-called root cause is found. and that root cause is solved. Until then, you cannot shut the alarm and you cannot get off call unless you have, reasonably determined that there's absolutely nothing you can do, and you leave it in someone else's hands and you go back to sleep. On some days, those days are so important, typically Prime Day or Black Friday or the major events or major launches for certain products. They're so important that what's called a war room is created, where all the main people of a certain team who are involved sit in a room for days at a time. Sometimes they go home at night. Usually, but they're interchangeable. Like some will go home and get some sleep, others will return, etc. But there's like a body of workers always present in a war room for a few days when there's major stuff going on. So on Prime Day, there was actually famously a failure where all of Amazon.com crashed on Prime Day. And so you had senior VPs on the call, you had all kinds of chain of reaction going on, war rooms all over the place. There were hundreds of affected applications, if not thousands, and they're searching for the root cause. And then once the root cause was found, it was not easy to fix because there was a request queue, so-called, that was bottlenecking, and there was just too much to handle, and they just couldn't recover that service for a long time, and stuff like that. So, again, at level 5, you have to be on par with all this. And yet you're not really getting the good rewards of all the work at that company. Now, at level 6, which is when I was hired at level 6, so I bypassed a lot of the what happens until there, like the rat race and the proving ground, which happens at level 4 and level 5. And like I said, only 2% used to get from 5 to 6. So to get hired at level 6, it's actually like a very major thing that you should be very happy about. So I did, and when I worked there, my experience was a bit different than that, because at that level, something like 20-30%, sometimes 50% of your work is, it's in the area of leadership, where you have to push forward with the direction things take. So, like I said, I was hired to prove certain new technologies back then were to be used, and a better choice than what the company was using. So you're talking about overturning the work of thousands of people and showing them that there's a better way. So that takes a huge amount of advocacy, evangelizing, etc. So I worked a lot on that. Then I had to meet with the higher up people often and tell them my take on things. At level 6, it actually starts really counting if you have interpersonal skills, because up until level 5, everyone is really smart in Amazon that I met. Like you can't really meet a lower intelligence person there quite easily, or if ever. But there are such things as different kinds of intelligence. And because of the hiring is so stringent, like I described, almost everyone is narrowly focused. They're specialized so hard on one thing that they tend to have a certain kind of intelligence, but very many people lack the other kinds of intelligence. And it's very actually rare to find a person who is so good at computer science that it doesn't come at the cost of having poor interpersonal skills. So what you start seeing at level 6 is that the people who are good at communication, good at leadership, they are confident and convincing, and all that, they start getting ahead more so than someone who may be an extremely good coder. And there happens to create a degree of jealousy there, because they start looking at you and say, why is that guy who may or may not code better than me actually level 6, actually getting paid more, actually has a position when they're no longer the workhorse? And I should be at that position, but such people often ignore that there's more than one kind of intelligence out there. And many of these people, they do actually proceed to level 6 at some point, but they may get capped at that, because from 6 to 7 to get promoted, then that is really difficult. And that's yet again, I was told 2%, but I believe it's actually harder than 2% based on what I experienced at my type of job, my role. There for years there had never been anyone in the whole company, 0, who had proceeded from level 6 to level 7, which is called principal. And I tried that for a bit, but my projects that I had prepared for that were canceled. And I'll explain how that works too. So where you find yourself at level 6 after a while, this was really the best part of the whole company for me, or the job. I would start going to these conferences. You apply for them, they approve, you send a pitch. And for example, I went to Amsterdam to speak at a development conference to teach the European employees how we are doing things in Seattle in the realm of the UI and stuff like that. So I did that in India as well. I was traveling around, I was coaching. In the same time, I was sitting with the people in Seattle across multiple organizations, trying to align something like 50 different web applications to use interchangeable modules and services, etc. So we were trying to make it so that every app can talk to each other, and it's all uniform. So you had to create frameworks internally, you had to create component libraries, etc. And you may think this now is very easy to think about, it's very common, but back then it was not. So we had to invent it. And then one thing is to invent it, but two, it's very difficult to actually make it happen in a company like Amazon, where so many things have to turn, and there's so many people involved, so many decision makers, so many workers, that it's actually hard to make any kind of change happen. And so that was one of my projects, but then after a while it just wasn't getting traction, and then directors or VPs may decide it's too difficult and cancel it. So I had 2 such projects get canceled. They were across multiple teams and organizations, and in the end, out of your control, it's many people involved and you're just one of the engineers, for example, giving technical direction, but because of XYZ factors, it gets deprioritized, other things are deemed more important, etc., and it doesn't take off. And then it's out of your control, you have nothing to do about it, and yet you have no path to promotion now, and it takes you another year or 2 to be able to find such a project, work on it, and then make it happen and try to get the promotion going. And then the promotion itself is extremely difficult to achieve at that level, because you have to get that big project, you have to talk to such a person called the principal engineer, which is the next level you're trying to get to. And that principal engineer's almost entire role is to basically set the pace and the direction and architecture of things and approve things and dismiss things. And he doesn't necessarily push code into production anymore. He's there for his expertise and authority and leadership. And so that's what I was trying to get to. But 2 times what I was trying to work on was canceled. Then there was another time I was pitching a business idea, because I thought, and they encourage you, they tell you, anyone should be able to write a business idea, product idea, and pitch it and push it forward. And we have internal hackathons, I worked with an intern on it, etc. But in the end, again, there's a queue of projects everyone is pushing. If they don't pick yours up, then that's it. It just languishes, it flounders. And so that didn't get approved either, even though to me it was an obvious thing, which Instagram later pretty much made. And I thought that we should have made it first anyway. All these things end up affecting your career. And then at the 4th year, you would reach a cliff year where if you didn't get promoted, your pay will drop significantly. And so there's actually a huge incentive or need for you to get promoted. So it becomes this kind of like a rat race where everyone is trying to play the game and get promoted really hard. Everyone is pushy and ambitious, and you have to understand you are there with extremely smart people. Everyone is smart, everyone's ambitious, everyone is well educated, everyone is a hard worker. So it's like the best of the best. That's the idea, at least, that the best of the best are there, and only the very best of the best of the best move forward. So, after a while, many people do what I did. When I got one promotion, effectively it was lateral, but you went into a higher paid, more demanding job family or job role, and that bumped my pay, which was great. And when that happened, I delayed, or I got more stock and was able to postpone my cliff year for 1 more year. So from 4, it became 5. So after the 5th year is when my pay would have dropped. And that 5th year, I had already decided to be a manager, and I had done things. I was like a second engineer in the entire organization, writing the prototypes, etc., launching stuff in production from nothing. And I thought, at this point, I've done all that. I'd rather try management. So I asked for a management role, which opened, and the director kind of was like, I don't know, and gave me a TPM job. He offered me TPM, not SDM. So the difference is software development manager, he has reports, they work for him, basically other engineers work for him. A TPM is still an individual, so-called individual contributor. So it's a manager with no employees. It's a funny role, but it serves kind of like as a glue in the company where when there are areas that some kind of work needs to be done, which is not exactly coding or is still technical work. Sometimes it's process, sometimes coding, sometimes networking, sometimes simply management of projects in basically the Jira equivalent system. But they look for such areas where such a person is needed on a technical level. So it's a technical manager of the program, allegedly. So I was offered that kind of role. I did it for about a year. And then I moved over to another company as a TPM. So that was my path. I stopped coding at that point. I thought that something like 15 years of coding was enough for me on the job. And then I had coded since I was 8 years old. So, I had really tired of it by then. And I thought that I had contributed enough and shown enough that I have skills beyond simply coding. And because of that, I actually have some exposure to management as well as coding. And I can tell you that the types of management there's three really broadly. Software development manager, TPM technical program manager, and a product manager. And again, people are very ambitious, very smart that work in those roles. And the SDM is really the most coveted role, but it also bears the most responsibility because what I described with the alarms and on-call and waking up at night, that all falls on the manager. Like in the end, that manager owns that system. They don't care if his employee was not able to fix it or whoever. In the eyes of the director or the VP, it is the manager that has to answer for all that. And also he has to handle the staffing issues. Basically, when there are people who underperform, etc., is the SDM dealing with that. And when employees require coaching and getting them to the next level, is the SDM that has to deal with all that. So as a TPM or a program manager, you're still working there on technical stuff, but you don't have those other responsibilities. So SDMs get paid the most and they have a more clear path to next level. Though product managers, I have seen, because they're closer to the business and they all crunch numbers and invent products that should move the needle, the bottom line of the business financially, they actually also have a path to things like general manager and director. But it is probably the most common when the SDM becomes a general manager or director. It depends. At that point, you have to have multiple types of skills. You can't just be technical. You have to also be good at management, at interpersonal communications, and other as well, know business. And you have to demonstrate that, prove it, etc. So it starts getting very difficult. So it's easy to think as a coder, you're like, I do all the work, because without me, there's no product, there's no code, there's no software. And you may think, why are these people above me making the decisions? But if you actually attempt at working up there with those people on the business layer, you may find out that it is harder. And these are also smart people who also work very hard. And, everyone thinks they work the hardest in the end of the day. But I will say one thing, in these companies, after a while you start understanding there truly is class division in a way. There are coders who do everything, yes, in a way, but there also are managers, and it is the managers who actually get the spoils, despite them not so much coding at all, or waking up at night to fix everything. And so you get your opportunities limited as an engineer and a coder, and you also burn out more because, let's be perfectly honest, when it comes to frying your brain and exhausting yourself and burning out, coding is much harder than management. So you are the workhorse of the company as a coder, and you don't necessarily get all the spoils. And then if you find that you have skills and ideas which are better or more valuable than the managers, VPs, etc., it is very difficult to get them across, because these people are protective of their turf and they don't really like that, and yet they're the gatekeepers of it. So even though the company officially encourages that, it's not very easy to accomplish at all. You get rebuked often for, so like you're told, you go do the engineering, don't worry about this area over here. Even though if you talk to a director or VP, they'll be like, oh, we love it when engineers pitching ideas and businesses and write papers and etc. And as an engineer, you think, that there's a clear avenue of growth for me if I prove that I'm good at product or business as well. I have that trifecta of skills. But yeah, they get protective of their turf, and there's like, you're judged at a completely different skill set as an employee when you start performing at that level. So, let's say you do become a manager, the way you were valued or judged in performance as an engineer is totally different from the way you're judged as a manager. So it's a different game, it's a different world. You would hope that such mechanism was better of, moving around or up, but it's actually very, very difficult, at least the way Amazon has done it. I believe most companies it is hard because the spoils become a lot. And also the company itself, the way Amazon does things, especially with the cliff here, but other things do it too. They want you to give them what you have. And if you are not willing to or able to give any more, they would rather go find someone else who will. And so they take you fresh with all the vigor. They make you an offer, you say yes. And then once you get in, you actually realize that moving up is very difficult. You probably were better off to come in at a higher level. And there's something called the boomerang effect. People reach the cliff here and they leave because they know how hard it is to actually get promoted internally. They go to a company which gives them a higher position based on their experience at Amazon. They grow their career there, and they return to Amazon at a higher position than they were. And that's called the boomerang, because it's actually easier and often more lucrative to do that than to stay inside and to get promoted. It's actually rather weird, but that is how it works, because the policy is such. The policy is hire a mass amount of people by the many thousands, make them an offer, and I'll explain very shortly how the offers work as well. But then they'll squeeze you hard to get whatever work you have in you, and then they'll say, well, most likely you're not one of the 2% that get promoted, you're the 98% that still stay back a level. And it's kind of hardcore. It's not so easy. But about the offer, the issue is that when you work there for a while, you start realizing that the most power you ever had when it comes to negotiating your salary is actually upon being given your offer for the first time before you even start in the company. Because they want you to work there, and for the most part you feel like, oh my god, it's happening for me, this amazing company is hiring me. So you actually don't push back too much to say, hey, pay me more or put me at a higher level. Most people are very grateful to receive those offers. Now, the problem with that is that once they offer you, the pay structure works like this. You are at your level and you have a cash salary, and that's called the base pay. And that base pay is limited, almost like to a middle class, above middle class, but not by very much. And the bulk of your pay is in stocks, which they call RSU. And they do that because that way, when they give you 401ks and other benefits, they're not actually based on your total pay, total compensation so-called, it's based on the base pay. So they save an enormous amount of money that way. So The other thing they do is that when they offer you that, they tell you right now is, let's say 2020, 2024, whatever it is, and let's use an easy number. You're given 100 stocks at a price 100, okay? And that equals X number of money. And the issue is that money is not coming to you until 2 years later or so in tranches, little by little. And at that point, the stock usually is up, if you're lucky. But when it is up, next time you go to your compensation meeting, they tell you, oh, hey, the stock went up, and the stock you were promised when you were being hired 2 years ago went up by 40%. And now that means your total compensation for this year is actually higher, and therefore, even though, you should be getting appreciation, you should be getting all that when you work here, you're not, because the stock appreciated that you were already promised. And so you thought when you were hired, hey, I'm offered this stock, and any of that appreciation is net gain for me, and I'll be given more as I work in the company and I make my way up, or I work there hard and they do cost of living adjustment, etc. They give you more money, right? But no, they actually look back and they say, oh, even though the stock was promised to you at 100, now that stock is worth 140, it is 40% higher, and therefore your total compensation went up on its own, so we don't have to bump you. You see how that works? So the truth is, if you wanted a better salary, 3 years in, you should have had it in your offer when you were hired. And to me, that is actually a lie that they make, because they look back in your total compensation, they offered you something, and then next year they say, oh, by now that lump sum, the award you are getting upon getting hired, is being deducted from what you actually pay, or is being counted against what you're getting paid this year, 3-4 years later. When you do that math, is heavily against your interest as an employee and heavily in the interest of the company. And so they effectively give you a lot less than you thought you would be getting. And I didn't like that at all. And then combine that with the cliff year. And the cliff year effect is because you are given all that stock at first, and it's considered a hiring bonus. And that hiring bonus expires 4 years in. And at that point, you then go to whatever they thought should be your base pay, and that base pay turns out a lot smaller than all that stock you were offered. If you ask for more stock and say, hey, I've been here 4 years, give me more stock, and they're like, here's 1 or 2. Like, a friend of mine did that. He got a promotion. He said I should have more stock than this. They gave him 1 stock. 1 stock. It was laughable. It's almost like, get out of here. What are you talking about? So, you may have heard that the money that people get is crazy, that is also easy, but it's not. It's actually really hard work, and the money is actually less than you think. Unless you get to level 6, 7, 8, 9, that's when the money gets really crazy. Probably over $1 million in the case of a level 8. And stuff like that. But as a typical, intermediate workhorse, you actually don't get that much. You still get good money, but not very much. And it was actually at first when you were being hired that your chance to get the most was, and most people actually passed it by, and that's really kind of messed up. So, it's not all peaches and cream. And they squeeze you really hard. And like I said, many people choose to leave and then return, because it's easier to go through that in your career. And that's pretty much what I did. I did that. I affirmed my management role that way. So for another 3 years, I was working in management at another company. I described that in my layoff video. And I was able to then be a manager, and I was getting a lot more cash because the base pay was not limited, because smaller companies don't actually have the chance of giving you stock rewards that always grow like these big tech companies. And so when you go to a different company, you may get more cash, you may get a higher role, you may get an easier job, and then you have the incentive to leave, actually. And most people do that. There's a lot of noise, so I'm going to cut and return a bit later. Okay, so I described how your hiring bonus is basically a scam that gets counted against your pay years later when you're told why you're not getting anything else. And then it results in a cliff year when it expires. And I told you how work goes across the levels. Now I want to get into more things like company culture, etc. So I described Amazon. It's very strict, it's very pushy, it's kind of like it organizes the company to be a rat race. Oh, there's also the infamous stacking, or whatever you call it, when the employees are rated against each other. And if you're level 6, usually you get invited to be part of that, so you're out there ranking the level 4s and level 5s, and you yourself get ranked by the level 7s and up. So yeah, level 6 comes with a lot more power, like I said, but Amazon had to pivot. It had to relax that because it was creating too much grief. It was kind of incentivizing people to be negative in the way it was telling you to look for flaws in people, and then they switched it around to make you look for strengths in people, and that was a more positive thing. I assume such things exist in companies like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, or Facebook, etc. But they differ in culture. I have lots of friends who have moved on from Amazon to Facebook, Meta, and to Google. I've been told Meta pays better than Amazon, but there are a lot of issues organizationally. I don't know them in detail, so I can't get into it, but I have noticed turnover. People who went into Meta have left, while some of them have gone further on into Google, or have gone directly to Google and stayed there. From what I have heard, Google is easiest to work for in terms of the expectation. Employees in Google often say that they work only about 6 hours a day, while in Amazon you often pull 10, 12-hour days. Stuff like that I've heard. So people say Google is easier and tend to stay there longer, and the pay is, I think, also higher. There's also a difference between the pay you get in the Bay Area in California, Silicon Valley in San Francisco, and Seattle. Seattle is second, but the difference is not that small. So you often hear crazy sums of money coming out of the Bay Area. Sometimes they're embellished, the Blind app and people talking about their total compensation. Sometimes they embellish, sometimes they don't tell you exactly the structure of things and what it ends up being and stuff like that. But there is a big difference. In the Bay, you get paid more, and Google and Facebook do pay more than Amazon and Microsoft in the Seattle area. But I think Seattle is actually second. Sometimes New York can get close, but not always. Even though New York has higher cost of living than here, they often don't make the same amount of money somehow. Or sometimes it's the same while their cost of living is higher and their taxes are higher. So there is that about pay. Company culture in Google, I've heard, is more relaxed, though you hear how they stuff the office with candy, and these 30, 40-year-old people have toys on their desks, and it just sounds really infantile. I think they're famous for everyone acting like an overgrown child over there. Again, I haven't worked there, I cannot verify that, but I have heard that there's the other stuff where Google, they've started putting apartments in their office buildings, and I don't know who exactly these apartments are for, because there are not very many of them. But think about you live in your company, wow. And remember what I told you about how you may get summoned in the middle of the night? Well, if you live in the office, they might come knocking on your door from the bottom, say, why are you sleeping? An alarm went off 3 minutes ago and you still haven't responded. I'm joking and exaggerating, but to me, it actually sounds rather nightmarish to live in my office. Actually, in the office, yes. There are apartments in the Google offices, which is really strange to me. Another thing to talk about the culture is that you have seen the phenomenon of the female product managers making TikTok videos, how pretty much all they do all day long is eat and get the office perks and network events and go to the bar after work with friends. those are basically recruitment videos. These are videos where those employees are told to make, or they make them on their own volition, but they look favorably because they attract more people into the company, thinking it's really easy, it's the good life. Well, it actually is harder than that, but that's just the representation on TikTok. And the truth is that there was something like a feeding frenzy. It was very easy for a little bit. Something like 2019-20, a huge amount of employees were being hired, and because of that, the bar was dropping. The less you hire, the higher the bar. So with such numbers, they could no longer ensure the very high bar that they had before in these big tech companies, and it got easier. Some people were hired that would have never been hired before, and they not necessarily have stayed there. Some may have been pushed out and then laid off or something like that, terminated, or just simply couldn't cope and quit on their own. But such things really stopped happening when the stocks went down in 2022. And the hiring froze, and ever since that, mostly we've had just layoffs. So I do believe since then, hiring is less, offers are smaller, and expectations are higher because, if you don't work there, it's hard to get a job anywhere else. And therefore, there was like a little blip, not blimp, there was a little blip, a golden age of a few years. And then together with that, there was a push, it was rather political actually, to change the work culture where they were talking about mental health and making it easier to work in these companies, and people were hired entirely in such roles to make you feel better about working. Kind of like Europe is more relaxed and people work less hours. There was a push around 2020, but that too seems to be on its way out, where the expectation is now again harder and higher, and these people no longer really are just hired for the sake of being some kind of social butterfly or to make you feel better about your employment. So yeah, they're turning their backs on certain policies. Noise again, I'll be right back. And on that topic that I just mentioned with their policies kind of ebbing and flowing, the truth is there are so-called diversity policies, quotas. There are multiple times we were told by the management, hey, our entire organization is male almost, and our team is 100% male. We need to hire more women. And we're like, great, let's do that. Because, let's be honest, who wants to be surrounded by men 100% of the time? And so we try. And one time there was a case, this woman came and we interviewed her. Everyone thought that she didn't really have the technical skills. And so we put that in the feedback, and the manager said, I get what you're saying, but we have to fill the quota, so I'm going to offer her a job anyway. And he did. And she came back saying, well, I thought that the team has bro culture, and rejected it. So all of us were left kind of like, well, we don't want to hire you anyway. That's just hilarious to me. So yes, diversity quotas are very real, and they exist on different levels as well. That's not just a rumor. Besides that, the company cultures differ. Like I said, Meta, Facebook, and Google are more generous because they actually make their business or their money from ads. And if you know that kind of business, ads are almost 100% profit margin, something like 98%, 97%. And they're able to be much more generous and looser with their policies, and therefore create a more relaxed office culture. In the case of Amazon and Microsoft, they're a lot more demanding and stricter, and they pay you less money. So it's kind of a no-brainer, to be honest. If you're gonna work, try working for the Californian companies that make their money from advertising, straight up cyberspace money. It's like, search. On every search Google does, some ads are shown. Same with Facebook. Every time you're scrolling, some ads are shown. They have almost 100% profit margin on those things. While if you're Amazon, you actually have to ship goods. You have to maintain a massive marketplace, warehouses, truck fleets, all kinds of crazy stuff that is so mind-boggling. in how it works. And so these companies, or Microsoft, you actually have to make an operational system like Windows. You actually have to do so many hard things in software. In the case of Facebook, they made a little social network and made it big, and then they show ads, and now it's like they're gilded. You know, they, they get money forever until people stop using it, which can happen. You know, people stop using MySpace, for example. And then Facebook also did good acquisitions with Instagram and WhatsApp, which they're also using now for cash. So that's kind of how they're able to pay people more while demanding less of them. When you look at more recent things that both Google and Facebook have tried to do, like the metaverse, that went nowhere. That was such a massive blunder. And Google is similar. They've only really had a few successful products. They've had search and email and maps. Those are the OG. They've also made acquisitions like YouTube, like Android, which have been very nice. But YouTube famously has not really made much money, if any, because they pay the creators a lot, and they're kind of a cultural thing. Everyone loves YouTube, but for the sake of the company making money from it, it's actually not that successful, funny enough. But search is so successful for money that they manage to feed all the other businesses that they have, or try. But the truth is, the Google hasn't really had a successful product in a long time, and neither has Facebook. Though I don't know the numbers of Instagram, but I can see both Instagram and Google are going into shopping, basically trying to cut into Amazon's margins. And these companies compete against each other. Then there's the cloud. The cloud, to me, is super boring to work on. If you're a certain kind of engineer, it's very interesting because of scale. And now I'm going to explain what I meant earlier about scale. It is almost infinitely, but so much easier to make an application which no one uses but you. If you have one user, you can make a really beautiful application fast, and you can be proud. The issue is, as soon as you put it in front of people, they will find problems with it. And the more people are using it, the more problems. And therefore, when you're working at scale that billions of people are using your products, you start having to do so much work which has to do strictly with the scale of your operation. And that is really by far the hardest thing about working at these companies. Working in a smaller company, you may feel great about what you're doing and creative and put code fast out there and be happy. Once you go to a big company, all that really changes because it's so much harder to put things out. Everything is harder, bigger, and you're bogged down. You have to talk to so many more people. Gatekeeping is much stricter because if you make mistakes, the impact is much bigger. Lots of money is on the line and reputation. And so scale is really the big difference between big tech and everyone else. And that scale is really hard to work with. Like a simple server developer who's standing up a server which is serving a request to a web application that does a login or a simple list of users or stuff like that. Well, in the case of Amazon or Google or anyone else up there, the big ones, you have to go through a massive amount of security reviews, stress testing, all kinds of stuff, and then you have to have alarms attached. You have to have this really rigorous type of work that you do instead of simply putting something out that you coded yesterday, you know. And then there's everything has to be peer reviewed. You cannot push anything without a peer review of at least 2, sometimes more people. Sometimes there's something like change management. And the change management, if you're pushing something important, you have to be collecting signatures, basically. Several employees, all the way to director often, have to sign off on a release before you can actually put something out there. It actually starts to become very difficult, very bogged down, and you may feel like you're working in bureaucracy instead of in technology. And that's really the nature of the game, and that's why a lot of people burn out, because that's when you really start feeling like a cog in the system. You're like, oh my God, like you're asked to change color sometimes, or something small, right? And you have to go through so many hoops that have nothing to do with your technology savvy to be able to put that change out. But you know what? Even the colors, even the fonts are decided at central levels. They have to do with marketing campaigns, with company logos and images and stuff like that. And legal even. So every application I've had to work on in big tech and similar companies, legal, basically a team of lawyers has had to examine, especially on the first launch or every major launch, there has to be a lawyer included. And the lawyer is going to analyze what you're actually delivering and then tell you whether that can happen or not. There can be all kinds of delays which you did not foresee if you came from a smaller company. In one case, we simply didn't have the metrics. Everything has to be counted and put into a database so you can analyze the performance of every little thing. It's more mind-blowing than you can ever imagine. But in one case, we had to delay a release by 3 months because a dependent team did not have a metric surface when we were using their module. And that meant we would be blind to performance. And we said, you know, we have this business worth who knows how many millions of dollars. We're itching to push it, you know, the green button, launch, and start operating our business. And simple one metric is not coming out of one module, and we had to wait for 3 months for that team to fix it because they have a queue, you're dependent on them, so they have to get to the queue, you know, to your item in the queue, and you're sitting there basically very frustrated because a little wheel has to turn somewhere else in the company. And again, that's a product of scale and complexity that is far above and beyond what you're used to working as an independent developer or as someone in a smaller company. And that's really the true biggest difference between working in a big tech software company and working at a smaller company. Everything is very strict, very rigorous in terms of creating the technology. And it makes sense because that technology is used so much, right? If it wasn't used as much, the scrutiny is much less and it's much looser. So that kind of stuff really starts getting to you, like when you have to go collect signature, delaying launches, waiting on dependent teams, someone's on vacation, you cannot do what you want, then you're being judged as if you failed it, but it's somewhere down up a chain, who cares, but it's really on you. And that's the other thing. These companies, they love the term ownership. And so you're told you own everything, every failure you own. And yet, when it comes to decision making, you own nothing. And therefore, you know, it's two-sided. You are judged massively when it comes to failures, but success is normally the higher-ups, the leadership, can claim for themselves. But that's really typical of any human organization. But you're just dealing with a much bigger organization. It's like a behemoth, you know. I'm talking about companies that Amazon has more than 1 million employees, and other ones have them by the hundreds of thousands as well. So these are the sizes of small countries out there, or big cities, you know, and they're organized like a pyramid structure. You know, we talk so much about democracy, etc., in the West, but our companies are still organized like actual monarchy. There's a CEO, like a king on top. And then he has 12 advisors, the board, the seniors. There's a board, which is basically the investors and stakeholders who are holding you accountable to your performance. And then there's the rest of it is linear, you know, level something to something, 3 to 12. And it's like a pyramid with one person on top, a small circle, and then everything down there is like their actual underlings. And that is the structure of a monarchy. That's not the structure of a democracy. So it's funny that, you know, we're so partial to the idea of how democracy makes the biggest or best governance, and yet when it comes to our economy, we're actually organized like monarchies. And so you're working for such a structure, you should expect that there's going to be issues with the political organization of it itself. And so that discourages a lot of people. Many people prefer to go on the side, start their business, or be the so-called solo developer, where you're good enough that you can put things to market on your own, and then you try to make money, and no one holds you accountable but your customers, and you're the business. But then it means you have to do 20 people's jobs. In a big corporation, every little thing is done by different people. Everything is very separated. You know, the whole division of labor concept, where if you divide tasks into the smallest and smallest and smallest in category, and you specialize people narrowly, and that's how you are most efficient as a business. Well, that is how things work these days. You're ultra specialized, you do one small thing well, and you find yourself in a giant structure, and you don't necessarily actually make much impact. You know, if you studied super hard, you thought you're very smart, and you're also creative, you want to create big change in the world, it's actually very difficult in a company of that size. You're better off looking at a startup, but then your problem is the payout is dubious. So, you know, you have to weigh out the pros and cons, and there are pros and cons in every choice. Personally, I chose not to work for startups because they promise you future money, and me as an immigrant, I could not work on future money. You know, I came to this country with nothing, so I had to get the stable employment and enough payout that I can actually buy a home and raise a family around here and things like that. If maybe if I had grown up here with enough financial backing, I could take more risks. And so, yeah, you have to think of your risk tolerance. You have to think if you can perform at that level, for how long before you burn out, and what risks you can take, and stuff like that. For me, I thought the path was good, and I don't rule it out. I may return. I'm currently taking a bit of a break because being laid off actually gives me that chance. And I still don't know. Maybe I'll go right back to work. Maybe I'll start a successful business, and I won't. But my thoughts have not been determined yet exactly which way I'll go. And if I go somewhere from here, actually, you know, I have it on my mind to try to get into big tech. If that's where I find myself in something like 3 to 6 months, maybe I'll apply at any of these companies I just described. Maybe I'll apply for another one, which isn't so much of a tech company, but it needs tech people in its tech division, and it's actually easier there, and you can create more impact. Maybe I'll do that. You know, I haven't actually made up my mind, but all this knowledge I just gave you about what it's like inside the company of such size should maybe help your choices. Well, that was a long speech. I've been talking for a long time. So if you want me to talk more about any of these subjects, leave a comment below, like and subscribe, and I'll be able to pick up your ideas and make new videos and address whatever feedback you have for hearing more about these things. See you later.